Here to talk about this and all of the events that are shaping the news in the Middle East is Oklahoma Congressman Steve Russell, a 21-year veteran of the U.S. Army and author of Got Him, a memoir of the hunt and capture of Saddam Hussein. Welcome to the show, Lieutenant and Congressman, and thank you so much for your service to our country. We appreciate your time today.
Well, thank you. It's great to be with you.
Are the reports true that the Jordanian king himself actually suited up and led the bombing against ISIS?
No, I think the Jordanian government has been clear that that was not the case. But I think it's important to show that he is a trained fighter pilot and that he, as the king and leader of the armed forces, fully understands what is required. And I think it's inspiring to see that, he is so engaged in trying to stop ISIS, which I call the sham state.
Yeah. Well, and with this, though, it's great to see this pushback in the Middle East, because this is something that we have wanted to see for the longest time. But I understand ISIS completely brutal, but we've had terror factions in this area for such a long time. Why has it taken up till this point for Jordan to finally retaliate and finally stand up and say enough is enough and push back?
I think what you're seeing with ISIS is a transnational ideology. You had that with Al-Qaeda, but they weren't really claiming territory. They weren't trying to govern cities. They weren't committing wholesale atrocities. They were trying to win the population and then commit acts of terror against those that they opposed. Whereas, ISIS is trying to force people to bend them to their will with acts of barbarity. And it's important that we deal with barbarians with lethality and with severity. And it's very exciting to see Jordan joined by possibly Egypt. They just came out with their long Islamic institution of education and some of their key clerics that have condemned the actions of ISIS and are calling on those to join in the fight against them. This is very important because they see it's an ideology. It's not some local group that you can somehow attack on the ground. It has to be stamped out.
And I know Jordan is a part of the coalition, so to speak, that's pushing back against ISIS. You mentioned Egypt. Do you think that we would see such aggressive reaction or response from Saudi Arabia?
I think it's important that the United States aid and assist all of those that are affected in the region. You already have over 40 countries now that have joined in this effort to try to curb ISIS. And I think we can take some lessons from France in their dealings with Boko Haram and the problems in Nigeria and West Africa. They're providing aid, logistics, intelligence. They are assisting in the ways that they can, but you have 5 countries in that region that are actually doing the ground fighting and are forming a coalition. That's a good model that we should pay attention to. Now we have someone as responsible as King Abdullah that is leading and willing to lead some of this effort, and I think we need to assist him as rapidly as we can.
Absolutely. Assist him and assist the Kurds, who seem to be, at least in this particular arena, right on the front line. There's been a lot saying that, well, the death of this pilot and Jordan's reaction, this is uniting the Arab world against ISIS. Is that an exaggeration? Is there just, do you think it would? I mean, this is finally it. We're here at the point of breaking.
I think we have a rare opportunity with the outrage that you see. The Sunni Arab right now in Syria and Iraq is disenfranchised. They really have no place to go. They're either forced to join ISIS or some Al-Qaeda type terrorist group, or they're not engaged by their parent governments in either Syria or Iraq. That's a problem. And so these leaders, particularly in Iraq, they need to accommodate and help the Sunnis feel like they've got some place to go. And I think you'll see a lot of people stand up. Many of these people that they are fighting, I fought myself in the area of Tikrit, former Ba'athist that later joined Al-Qaeda and Zarqawi, and now they've joined ISIS. You have tribal conflicts there between, groups that have been fighting each other for some time. They're just under some new banner to go out and hash out old grievances. But I do think that this is not what the Sunni Arabs desire. They are not radical Islamic jihadists. Most of them are secularists in that area. Many of them are educated and have great technical skill. We need to stamp out this, the Arabs call it Daesh, which is a derogatory term for ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and al-Sham, or the Sham State. We need to treat these barbarians with severity and lethality. But before we open up the coffers and open up the timelines to the president, he needs to tell what the long-term strategy is, what the goals and objectives are. In my previous life, I've been on the receiving end, and before we commit our warriors to efforts overseas, we've got to have a clear statement. Are we fighting an ideology? Are we fighting something short-term? The president has to develop a national strategy, and then we can help secure the things to win. America has the capacity to lead and assist the countries that are fighting ISIS there right now.
Are you optimistic that we'll get that from his strategy coming out this Friday?
I think we should demand it, and I'm discouraged that the president this morning in the National Prayer Breakfast used an opportunity to lecture instead of lead. He needs to lead on this and call evil evil. You don't dismiss or lessen the barbarity of ISIS by somehow calling up some weird interpretation of previous history. We have a real crisis here that requires a leader of the free world to aid and assist strong allies like Jordan that we've had for decades. And the president can do that. It's not the time to be playing games. It's the time to lead. And it's the time he'll have the unity of the Congress behind him if he displays a clear strategy. But as a former warrior that has fought in these areas, we cannot commit our armed forces to something that has no clear strategy. So we are awaiting the president's leadership in this regard.
Last question for you, Congressman. I've read a few headlines where there have been some Muslim leaders who have suggested, well, we'll assist the United States in backing up Jordan with this, but then when we're done here, we need to go take out Assad, which I think would be solving one problem and creating another. I mean, as much as horrible as Assad is, I mean, if it's not a secular leader, then we would have ISIS, or those so-called moderate rebels who we have no idea about their ideology, to take his place. What do you make of that?
Well, and you bring up a good point, because not long ago, Congress was actually considering arming ISIS, which was an absurd notion, but people didn't understand the nature of the ideology and the problem. And I think that we have to allow those states that are willing to fight it and battle it, give them the implements to do it, give them the aid and assistance, but we have to treat it as the problem that it is, because if this ideology continues to grow, it will cause regional problems on a large scale. And so I really think that we have to act swiftly, but we have to have a good strategy for it. And as a long-lasting presence or something like that with the Assad regime, I think we ought to go to the table, maybe not with Assad, but we ought to sit down with Russia, who has the port at Tartus in Syria. They have a vested interest with a large naval base there. They would have some opinions on this. Dialogue is never bad, and we need to sit down and look at a long-term strategy so that we can deal with these barbarians. All of us agree that these barbarians should be stopped. Then we can sort out some of the other problems later.
Absolutely. Congressman Russell, thank you so much for coming on with us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.